Good evening, members of the House. I declare this the 17th ordinary meeting of the 175th session duly constituted and call upon the Honourable Secretary to read the minutes of the last meeting.
David for authors. On the 22nd of February 2023, no it wasn't 2024, the Queen's University Belfast Literary and Scientific Society convened for the 16th ordinary meeting of the 175th session. The motion, this House believes we have strayed from God. Well, that's what it says here. As usual, the meeting began with announcements. Dermot Hamill, HLM, announced Laveries, and then the Conversazione. And then the second week of March, there's the Vice President's Cup of Queen's IV on the 23rd to the 24th of March. President Toft announced Lit Talks to Robert Buckland, NI Select Committee. There's no context to that, I've just written it there. Ella Griffiths, please pay money, £5. Thomas Sunshine Burns announced the Lit Schools Comp, biggest ever, 12th of April. Final, be there or be square. Following a reading of the minutes, the meeting moved on to private members' business. Luke Anthony Patrick McGuire raised something called the Devilish. Responses were heard from Dermot Hamill, unsurprisingly, and that was it. Tom Sunshine Burns raised the collapse of the House of Commons. Responses were heard from someone and Max Kieran. Max Kieran raised the Russian presidential election. Responses were heard from myself and Cormac McSparren. President's questions then took place, sadly. Dermot Hamill, HLM, asked how many times the word conference was said that day. Quote, hundreds, if not thousands. There will be no context to what that's about. Max Kieran then asked the real question, hard or soft? Cookies, that is. Soft was the response. After President's questions, the vote on prior opinion was held. 25 votes for aye, 17 for nay, and 1 abstention. So the proposition had it. Shut up. First in the proposition was Michael Kelly, the last Catholic in Ireland.
Excuse me?
He expressed his happiness that alcohol is still present at universities. He then argued that our era is one without free choice and thus belief in God is no longer predominant. He referenced Nietzsche, sadly, and the concept of quality of souls before God. Quote, people are not equal, end quote. So true. He referenced atrocities during the 20th century, and at least one member of the council's blood pressure went up with this. He then referenced Albania as the world's first atheist nation, where, Tom, you were there last summer, weren't you? How was it? Okay, very good. And then he said that this is not sustainable. The 20th century saw the emergence of totalitarianism in opposition to religion. The Guardian's Shane claimed that a post-Christian Europe is one which was without universalism and human rights. Seamus Heaney was mentioned. Discussed the biggest shift in his lifetime, the evaporation of the transcendent in the modern era. Big words. Ireland without God is a grim place. Quote, Ireland has the 4th highest cocaine usage. Dermot became shifty. First in the opposition was Mary Lou, not MacDonald but McShane. As a humanist, she does not believe in God, shock horror. But to say this is flippant, apparently. She brought up Mrs. Thatcher, saying that there is no such thing as a society, but she did believe in God. Beliefs come from the story we tell ourselves. Beliefs are our attempt to rationalise events. This is a first form sort of sociology course, I can see. This is the way it's going here. Humanity depends on well-being, good things, nice things. People who are religious are good and moral people. Quote, I could have ended up burnt at the stake a few centuries ago, end quote. Social mores are changing all the time, and there have been shifts in power. Then somehow seemed to infer that being religious means you support drink driving. Good. Second on the proposition was regretfully Misha Gerard. In the past 30 years, women have become degenerate. Her words, not mine, but I think we can all agree with the sentiment, especially with Jacqueline being the case study there. Anyways, how many of us think about God every day besides Jack or Luke? Our world has become too materialistic. Religion is the sanctity of life, justice and charity. Luke then asked a question that was too high above my pay grade. And, quote, I don't know what the context of this is, quote, I'm a Jew, so arguing with God is a core part of my religion, end quote. Quote, a great man once said the Industrial Revolution and its consequences. Everyone laughed besides the humanist representative who looked disgusted. This was a frequent occurrence throughout the night. Quote, all of our souls are polluted and empty. We must reconnect with the divine, embrace true love. And in brackets I wrote, is this a Biden speech? Second in the opposition was mini-me, Max Kieran. He defined the notion, and then he defined what society is, and we live in one, apparently. I looked at my messages, and then for about a minute later, Max was talking about community policing. I don't know what happened, but nevertheless, he then reflected on his time in primary school and how he has to pray every day. And look where it got him. He stated that he believed in God and that the religion calibrates our morality, wondering which side he was in the debate here. He then argued that religious people should all gang up on atheists. I approve of this sentence 100%. And so does so do Ben, I heard that. As our society really strayed away from God's teachings, he then defined the word strayed. Then the Orthodox Church was mentioned, and he claimed that the Orthodox Church is responsible for communism. Altruism has increased, and Sam Bankman-Fried somewhere in the world got very aroused. Third in the proposition was Jack Steele. The Reverend Steele Pastor Steele thanked God for Mrs. Thatcher. Amen. He quoted Dante. Without God, there is no morality. Atheism called socialism. But therefore, surely that means the Russian Orthodox Church is socialism. Who knows? No morality. Dermot Hamill, quote, Franco Spain, laughs. This is a debate about God, not religion, end quote. The totalitarianism means a destruction of Christianity. Stalinism sought to destroy religion. Marx asked the question, then grimaced, makes face all you want, he is listening, end quote. We have replaced the altar of Jesus with the altar of the individual, stated Pastor Steele. We have become too concerned with the self, and we are drowning a society in an endless supply of foreign vomit. His voice rose about the subject of pleasure, something Jack is very well acquainted with. Third in the proposition was Henry Royden. Good people do not need morality. This speech seemed to become sort of like new atheism circa 2007. He began to rebuke various proposition speakers. Luke McGuire, quote, there is no better feeling than hurting someone, end quote.
Literally.
The speaker, and then Luke proceeded to lose a fight. Anyway, the speaker then called... Then, the speaker then decided to call Luke a skeptic, which for anyone who even knows is an interesting remark. Religion promotes ostracism. Religion seeps into economic and judicial systems. Religion bad. Religion really bad. The final speaker for the proposition was Peter Hutchinson. He began by defending the Holy Trinity. Good. Kindness is a beautiful virtue. We have a flower of Christian worldview, but we've cut off the roots. We will all die. He started talking about how home invasion murders and particles. On that point was repeatedly said, only President Emeritus McCormick slipped in, not the first time. Quote, I'm a wee bit of a dinosaur, end quote. He used the word, the creator. Sounds pretty sus to me. If you want a society with no human rights, no logic, no hope beyond the grave, the empty tomb of the opposition awaits you. Don't know what that meant. The final speaker was, I have no idea. Anyways, okay, let's give this a shot, he said, walking up dressed like Al Pacino in the film Heat. He talked about the Khmer Rouge in Nazi Germany. Godwin's Law was repeatedly invoked this week, and he quoted Tom Holland, the historian. He critiqued the prior speaker's points on good and morality. Liberalism was invoked, and I nearly had a stroke. Quote, liberalism is a Christian ideal, end quote. Nazism and Cambodia were mentioned. The speaker stated that those were bad. Very controversial thought there. Questions were heard from Dermot Hamill, HLM, and some ginger. Following the debate and the question of the House, the vote in speaker ability took place. There were 23 votes for the proposition, 17 votes for the opposition, 3 shut up, 3 for the abstentions. So the proposition have it. Can I take the minutes as read?
Thank you very much for that, and welcome everybody to the 17th ordinary meeting of the 175th session for the motion, This House Regrets the American Revolution. Before we go to council announcements, I have one bit of housekeeping to do that is very, very, very overdue. So, just over a month ago, our President Tauscher left the society, left the council even, stepped down officially. Now, I was sat on a plane in Manchester Airport, delayed, waiting to come back here to contest the EGM, and I was thinking, what could I possibly get Tauscher as a leaving gift? But luckily enough, I'd been with Mr. Hoey at the back there to the university archives, and I'd seen portraits of former council members made. One of my high school friends is quite a well-known artist now, back where I'm from, and he does it for football players and everyone else. And so I messaged him to see if he would possibly like to, basically do a commission, and he accepted. I have with me here tonight President Tasha.
Oh, right. Thank you very much.
There is very long overdue. Very long overdue for reasons of he's very busy and the Irish sea border and various other problems. But I'm glad it's finally here. It arrived last night, and I just hope it takes shape on the mantelpiece somewhere.
I was wondering why you kept being like, are you definitely coming to me?
But yeah, now we'll move on to council announcements. I believe we have Misha.
Hello, the new internal convener here. The Duffering competition for Best Speaker is being held next Thursday, and I would encourage you all to sign up. The sign-up form is in the link in bio on the Instagram or on the Facebook page, or you can just approach me after the debate or send me a message. And I think we're closing sign-ups on Sunday night, and then next Monday there's going to be an information session at 6:30 for those who are hoping to take part. And then on a Tuesday we're doing a pre-round at 7 p.m, so I know that is a lot, but it would be great if we could have as many as possible of you signing up. We've already got quite a lot more than last year, which is really fantastic. We're hoping on the Thursday to have drinks. We're going to have a wine reception here for the debate. We will have booze. That's great. And we've also got the lovely William Crawley chairing the debate for us.
Thank you. And can I just clarify that the information session on the Monday is optional, but very much strongly recommended you go to it, because the Duffering takes shape in a different format. It has teams, and it's marked as per Mr. Hamill's marking scheme formulated for the Society a couple of years ago. So we recommend you attend it, especially if you've never done it before, and the information session will be hosted by Mr. Hoey, who has kindly agreed as an independent host. So that'll be in the PFC, and it happens at the same time as the normal training session, which is taking place at 6:30, and that, even if you're not going to the Duffering, you can go along to that, and that is for Literific style debating just like this. It's the first training session of the semester, and there'll be a couple more on different styles, but we'll basically split attendees between people just there for training and Duffering, and we'll have 2 rooms. And then the day after, as Misha said, with the pre-round, that is the first round of the competition before the final in here on the Thursday. So anyone attending and taking part in the Duffering needs to go to that. And then finally from me, we have the Literifics IV on the 23rd and 24th of March, which is a weekend. If Belfast City Council ratify the application, it will be held in the City Council chambers. If it doesn't, it will be held on campus. We'll confirm that close to the time. We're looking for as many Literific teams as we can to take part in our own IV. It's different, it's not BP, it's this kind of debating basically. There'll be training sessions before, and obviously our own teams are put forward for free. We want as many as possible, even if you've never done it, and you'll be debating alongside Southerners and maybe English people. So, especially for the English people, I apologise in advance. Now, does anyone have any council announcements? Samuel?
So on the 25th of March, which is the day after the Literific IV, which is a Monday night, I think, we have our annual conversazione. So for those unaware, that's our society formal. It's set, as always, to be a really good night. It's in the Ulster Reform Club, which is a really nice venue. Thank you, Mr. Hoy, for helping make that happen. There'll be wine on arrival. There'll be a really nice dinner. It was really good crack last year, and it's an excuse to put on a suit or a dress, whatever you like to put on, and get relatively pissed. So please do come along. You can buy your tickets on our society fixer, which can be accessed through our Instagram, or you can buy them in person with cash off our dear secretary, Ella Griffiths. £35 for members. Sorry, the treasurer, Ella Griffiths. It is £35 for members, £40 for non-members. Also, we're going to Lavery's again tonight after the debate. I think we're in part of the pool room that's booked out. They're still working on that kind of weekly space. So yeah, please join us at the debate with pints and/or non-alcoholic beverages.
As secretary, it is now my job to ask you to please pay £5 for your membership. It gets you a £5 off your conference, that's the only ticket as well, and it lets us do cool things like have a wine reception, so you get your money in booze and other things, so please don't make me stand up here every week and beg you for £5. I also have the cash box if you want to pay in cash. You can speak to me, please.
Thank you. Anything else from council? No? Okay, we'll move on to private members' business, the section of the debate where you can raise and discuss anything that you've seen in the news or something you're interested in and wish to put before the House. Just like to say I'm very nervous at these two sat me. But does anyone have any piece of private members' business?
I do.
Does anyone else have any piece of business? Luke.
Right now, the UCD, Literary and Historical Society, is debating the motion, "This House Regrets America." So, do we think they just looked at our term card and copied our homework?
Yes. Anyone, anything on this?
Yes.
Kathleen?
Yeah.
Anyone else got any opinions on this? Okay.
As someone who, look Anthony Patrick McGuire again. As someone whose award-winning speech in the Dufferin last year was on the rise of America, I would love to go to them and speak about the glory that was the Vietnam War.
Yeah. Do we have any other piece of private business? Go on.
I was wondering what everyone thought of 30p Lee Anderson's lovely non-controversial remarks that he made on Sky News.
Do you have anyone on this? Whilst I awkwardly sort this lectern out. Okay, I'm not doing it. Go on.
It's not necessarily in regards to his Islamophobic statements, because they were pretty clearly Islamophobic, but the interesting thing that hasn't been talked about is the fact that Suella Braverman basically said the exact same thing, arguably worse, because she said that the entire state was being run by a secret cabal of shadowy people. There seems to be becoming a running trend for the government announcing that it's being run by someone else. But I'm surprised that he's been suspended, but there's been no word of any suspension around Suella Braverman. So that's just an interesting thing.
Come on.
I will point out that Lee Anderson also tweeted a picture of a pint of Madry recently. And interestingly, Tom Burns also drinks a pint of Madry. And no one has seen both Tom Burns and Lee Anderson in the room. And even as we talked about him, Tom Burns has left the room. So I wanted to question whether or not there's a secret conspiracy that really the Literific is being run by a secret cabal of Lee Andersons.
Misha.
Actually, speaking of secret cabals of people. my good friend and financier, Lord Rothschild. And just want to say, can all be appreciated I'm going to be going through some financial hardship while I wait checks in the post next month. I am nervous, by the way.
Do we have any more pieces of private members' business?
So the polls will probably be closing any minute now in what has become the single most scuffed by-election in the history of by-elections in Rochdale, in which 2 out of the current candidates have been denounced by their own parties as being not suitable for government, and nobody knows how to call this. So what do we think about democracy working definitely as intended? Yes.
I mean, any minute now is 2 hours and
Oh, is it?
20.
Still all the place.
3 minutes left.
Oh, here we go.
Speaking as someone who hates democracy in all of its forms, speaking as someone who hates the Labour Party, hates every established party out there right now, I love the fact they're rejecting people. I love the fact democracy isn't working. I love the fact there's so much chaos in all of this. I love the fact that we're all at each other's throats. It's beautiful. War is beautiful.
Speaking as everyone else, can you shush?
Who was that?
Me. Right.
Thank you.
Stay polite.
Anyone else on this? Ryan?
To give my prediction, George Galloway to win. To answer the this is like no one knows which way it's going to go. I think George Galloway to win.
Thank you.
Shame.
Anyone else? Okay, I think we'll move on to President's Questions, which is the worst part, and will be removed from proceedings where I can amend the Constitution. Please, nice, professional, relevant questions. Anyone? Max?
Given the struggle we have had tonight with the quote-unquote podium, do you think the council should look into getting some like nice, I don't know, IKEA flat pack furniture to like do speeches from?
This would have, that'd mean I'd have 2 bags and I'd have the banner stand and the camera to bring, so no.
Point of order. You already have discounted furniture.
He's gone, he's not in the room.
He's gone. He's not here. He's robbed us. He's robbed us.
Yeah. Anyone else before I move on?
I asked when you were put into office if you had a nice collection of fancy ties, and I would just like to report back that I've been very happy with the array of ties that I've seen.
Thank you very much. This one is from technically Harrods, but actually a charity shop at £3, and I only realised it was from Harrods when I got it home, and then Jack Steele, who isn't in the audience tonight because he's setting up an inferior event over somewhere there, came up to me and said, "Did you buy that tie for £3 at a charity shop?" I was like, "Yeah," and he'd seen it, and I was honoured that Jack Steele had seen the tie before me and held it, and you know, I think he wanted me to start, you know, worshipping him. But yeah, anyone else?
How does it feel to own a tie that Jack Steele didn't want?
You know, when Jack has like 500 ties, his funds are going to run out at some point. So, you know, this was the only tie left in Belfast because he'd been going around collecting them all. So,
Mr. President, I found myself in the place that they referred to as Thompson's Garage last night, and I'm currently still suffering the consequences.
God.
What's your favourite Belfast nightclub, and why is it Kremlin?
It is Kremlin, but that's just because I'm old. You know, I'm not first year, I'm just kind of old and decrepit, so Kremlin occasionally, but I don't drink anymore, so...
For hypothetical purposes' sake, if you were a person in Rochdale tonight, who would you vote for?
I can't have political opinions, but there is one candidate up at election who used to be an MP from near where I'm from, which worries me slightly. But no, I'm not allowed opinions on basically anything. Okay, I think we'll move on. We'll move to the vote of prior opinion. So this is the chance to vote on the motion itself before you've heard any speeches. So if you'd like to vote in favour of the proposition for the motion, "This House regrets the American Revolution," please raise your hand now. If you'd like to vote against the motion, please raise your hand now.
He was against. Welcome to the
19. And if you'd like to abstain on the motion, please raise your hand now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Quiet, please. Can we get the vote of prior opinion, please, Mr. Secretary? Quiet, please. Thank you.
So, on the question at hand, there were 9 votes for aye,
19 votes for nay, and 8 people don't know what America is. My margin of 10 votes, which is nearing Armagh, I don't know. The opposition has it.
Now, before we welcome the first speaker, I'm going to run through a list of rules for the evening. A full list of rules is available through our standing orders on the website, but here is the main bits that apply tonight. Each speech is 7 minutes long, with the first and last minute being protected time. The end of the first minute of a speech, which signifies the end of protected time, and the start of the last minute, which signifies protected time, will be signalled by the bell, meaning you can only POI people in the middle 5 minutes. To POI, raise your hand and say point of information on that point, or simply POI. Keep your POIs 10 seconds after giving a POI, 10 seconds long, and no barracking, meaning no back and forth. Luke Maguire, no back and forth. You're a repeat offender. And wait at least 15 seconds after giving a POI to give another one, or after someone else has given one. Once you've made your POI, you cannot go back and forth with the speaker. If you need to leave the room at any time, do so quietly between speeches, and can I be very clear, do not leave the room whilst people are speaking. It's very rude and disrespectful. And when you're outside, keep the noise down. And lastly, no swearing. If a speaker swears at during the course of the debate, they'll be fined a bottle of port to be presented at the next ordinary meeting. Now, to welcome Max Kieran to open the case for the proposition.
Ladies and gentlemen, what has democracy ever done for us? Furthermore, what has freedom ever done for us? That's the way the opposition is going to try to make you feel this debate is going to go tonight. They're going to rely probably very heavily on the mythos that we are all taught about the American Revolution. That was a valiant, noble fight for freedom against tyranny and taxation. But that's not true if you ever researched the historical facts of the war. So I believe the only way to start this debate is by going back to the history behind this event and explaining the real reasons why the American colonies seceded. So we're going to have to take our way back, not to the American Revolution, but to the 7 Years' War, which lasted 9 years because historians can count. The 7 Years' War is the first real great war. It was fought across pretty much every single continent, and hundreds of thousands died, which is not great. But the catalyst of the war was actually in America, where George Washington and a group of American settlers, without orders from the British Army, attacked French forts to try to push past the Appalachian Mountains and into northern Canada, region of Quebec. Now, the American colonists had been pressing to push past the Appalachian Mountains in order to expand territory. But they had been rejected at every turn from the French government and the British government. So, what's an American to do but to take matters into their own hands? This will become a running trend. They proceeded to attack the province of Acadia and expelled the entire population. This is an event that definitely won't be repeated at any point in time in American history ever again. Foreshadowing is a literary and narrative device. So this starts the Great War. Hundreds of thousands of people die, but sadly that is not important to the argument tonight. We're focusing on the American theatre. After the war, Britain obviously needs to tax people because it's bankrupt. The war is very expensive. So who better to tax than the people who arguably started the war without any orders to do so, and then proceeded to get a lot of people killed through military incompetence. He was not a great general. So, as a result, they raised taxes on imports and exports from America. Bear in mind, that's not a direct taxation on the American people. That's a tax on business owners, very wealthy business owners, who have been making profits in the southern states through the slave trade and the cotton mills, which are sent to create textiles, and very wealthy, like, northern business owners that were investing in shipping and aspects of that. So it's not a tax against the active American people. But it also, this is where it made its biggest misstep. It announced that they were also not allowed to push further past the Appalachian Mountains because those were to become a reservation for the American Indians who had fought in the 7 Years' War to protect their land. For the predominantly middle-class American settlers who were campaigning for war, which included 3 of the original 10 founding fathers, by the way, they weren't very happy about that, so they decided, in a brash idea that was never repeated before in history, America took matters into its own hands. Following the 1763 proclamation, they proceeded to protest against the taxations because their businesses were getting taxed a little bit too much. They were just sort of miffed that they weren't allowed to get the profits and rewards of war, surprisingly enough. A war that they caused and also failed to do well. And so, an 8-year-long war later, in which another couple 10,000 died, people got expelled, which will be covered later in the proposition speech. Slavery was maintained, and a couple of other things, that America got its independence. Well, hey, nothing bad will ever further happen in American history again. Now, I just want to... Sure.
You're making the point that America done things that are wrong, but every country has done things that are wrong. Slavery, colonization, all those things. You're blaming... So would you rather have no countries ever, no state ever?
Because that's not what the point of the argument is. The point of the argument isn't to say all countries are bad. We can also reflect on hindsight, critically evaluate situations that happen in history, and also reflect that not every situation happened is good. By taking the stance that we can no longer criticize countries are bad because everyone has done wrong, you reject the idea that humankind as a species can critically evaluate itself, figure out what it has done wrong, and move forward to better itself in the future, which I fundamentally disagree with. And so, equally, I think an important thing to register is the opposition is going to try to mention that it was about tax, but an interesting fun fact is 6 years of the American Revolution, taxes were double the point, the highest point of the British taxation of American goods after the 7 Years' War. So how could it be about tax if you're taxing the population a bit more? And it was about freedom, because we finally established a true working democracy in which everyone was allowed to vote. Everyone who was a guy, everyone who was also white and Protestant, and also had to own land, which very few people did. And also, out of all the people who did own land, only 12 of George Washington's good close friends could actually really select who ran the country. So, I believe I've outlined the basics, and a lot of my compatriots on the proposition are going to go and delve these into more specific details, but I think I've given you a good broad overview of what we are arguing for here. Yes, we can critically evaluate events that happened in history, and we can also take those and take the hindsight that we have learned to go, we cannot necessarily moralize every single event. Because one of the greatest tragedies of the American Revolution is the fact that ever since that day, the American education has glorified this as a conflict to be celebrated, an unassailable conflict that if you were to criticize is to be labeled un-American, to be labeled anti-freedom and anti-democracy, and has prevented any sort of actual reflection on the events that happened in this 8-year-long period. And thus, I would like to close with what I believe are 2 very good ideas about the proposition's opening arguments tonight. And we believe we can regret it on 2 counts. One, that it has deified a status of a war that has prevented America from reaching its, morally reckoning with the ideals it was founded on and what those ideals really were. And secondly, that it was a war supposedly after the fact to prevent tyranny, but actually more often than not proposed tyranny more than it prevented it. Thank you.
Insurrection is the most sacred of the rights and the most indispensable of duties. Those words perfectly encapsulate the issue we're debating tonight. The right of resistance, the right of revolution, is the right upon which all others depend. And we on the opposition are going to show how the invocation of this right by the American patriots is therefore not something to regret, in fact the opposite. It is the patriots of the American Revolution we have to thank for demonstrating the principles of natural rights, the social contract, and the right to revolution. According to Locke, individuals possessed inherent rights to life, liberty, and property, which governments were obliged to protect. When governments violated these rights or failed to protect them, the individuals retained the right to overthrow that government. The list of Parliament's violations of the American colonists' rights is endless. Taxation without representation, searching private homes without warrants, banning local assemblies from meeting. By violating the social contract, Parliament left the Americans no choice but revolution.
On that point?
Yes.
Does the modern American state not do all these things? Does Puerto Rico get taxed? Does it get represented?
You're right, that is a failure, but the principles, I would argue that that's why the American Revolution needs to be studied more, needs to be understood more, because if those principles were understood greater, then Puerto Rico wouldn't be taxed without having representation.
No, barking. Yes.
In economic terms, the American Revolution was also a resounding defeat for the policy of mercantilism, in which the 13 colonies exported raw materials to Britain. British manufacturers would turn these into manufactured goods and then sell them back to the colonies. This stifled domestic industry in the colonies, hurt their economy, and stopped them from developing as they should. The American Revolution contributed to the worldwide demise of this system, and not a moment too soon, because we were able to get rid of the archaic economic system. Sure.
As opposed to the modern one that was built on the economy of slavery and moral degradation.
Well, slavery was a great contributor to the idea of mercantilism, where slaves in colonies, like the 13 colonies, would produce raw goods that would be turned into manufactured goods by the British. Right, Max, taxes, you mentioned taxes, right? Let's come back to that. You talked about the Stamp Act, which the British introduced to raise revenue after the 7 Years' War, but you mentioned that it was just about the big business owners, the slave owners, that this tax was just on the goods that they made. But don't ordinary people have to buy the goods? Don't ordinary people have to buy the tea, the sugar, and that those taxes just drive up the cost for the ordinary consumer and hurt them? The phrase taxation without representation, I have to admit, may be overused in this discussion, but it reveals a fundamental truth, that Westminster had no right to lay direct taxes on the colonies because they had no representatives in Parliament.
On that point?
Yes.
Actually, there were 29 MPs, prominent MPs, that were formerly from the American colonies. For instance, Henry Kruger, who proceeded to hold a ministerial position during the American Revolution. Does that not show that there was representation?
But no representation directly for American constituencies in the British Parliament. So, in response to these accusations of tyranny and all the rest that they were getting from the colonists, the British decided to become even more tyrannical. After protests over the Stamp Act, the British introduced new admiralty courts where suspected American criminals would be denied that most fundamental right of English law, the trial by jury. The American Revolution was also a legitimate response to the threat posed by standing armies. To quote from the Declaration of Independence's list of grievances against King George, "He has kept among us, in times of peace, standing armies without the consent of our legislators." The colonists initially welcomed the protection provided by the soldiers, not unlike the honeymoon period between Catholics and the British Army during the Troubles, but in a similar way, relations quickly soured by the 1760s and 1770s. They had increasingly come to see the army as a tool for the enforcement of Parliament's various despotic acts. This was compounded in 1774 by the Quartering Act, in which the army could seize private property for the quartering of soldiers. This was also coupled by the fact that General Gage, when he began his military occupation of the city of Boston, was effectively a military dictator, as an act of Parliament had abolished local government in the state of Massachusetts.
On that point, But you brought up the fact that local government, in actual fact, the American government during this period had an early form of devolution. It had regional assemblies in Virginia, New York, and every single state, which argued most domestic matters. It was only national matters that was representative of Westminster. By that logic, could you not say...
Yeah, exactly. You're 100% right. The Americans enjoyed considerable self-government, and that was one of the things they were trying to protect. That they saw a government in the 1760s, 1770s that was trying to destroy that right of self-government. Example, by closing down their local assemblies. Now, at the start, I quoted from the Marquis de Lafayette, and it is here that these words particularly apply, because insurrection against unlawful authoritarian government is not just a right but a duty, because the American colonists had a responsibility to defend those rights, not just for themselves but for their children and their grandchildren. So if you're not convinced that the American Revolution was intrinsically justified, its legacy outside of America provides further evidence to oppose this motion. Movements in South America, Ireland, all following the American example of forming republican governments against foreign despotism. Now, a few months before he was killed by the British at Bunker Hill, the American patriot Dr. Joseph Warren gave a speech commemorating the deaths of 5 innocent people during the Boston Massacre. And in it, he told his listeners of their duty in the coming fight. You are to decide the important question upon which rests the happiness and liberty of millions yet unborn. Act worthy of yourselves. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, if you vote for this motion, then you vote against that most fundamental right that all of us have, the right to rebel and to resist against unjust, tyrannical government. Act worthy of yourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Luke, and can I welcome Henry O'Reilly to continue the case review.
One does not establish a dictatorship in order to safeguard a revolution. One makes the revolution in order to establish the dictatorship. I'd like you all to imagine that you live in a society where you can't vote. You can't purchase land, you can't travel freely, where your economic say over your own affairs does not exist. A nation where you give so much to receive so little. A nation that imprisons, that reprimands, and indeed executes those who express any discontentment to the status quo, the prevailing regime. A nation whose masses are fueled and institutions are held by the iron fist of indoctrination. A nation where evil ideals are worshipped and a respect for your fellow human being is nothing more than an irrelevant afterthought. This is not, as the opposition would like us to believe, a description of pre-revolutionary America. This is a description of post-revolutionary America. Land of the free. That is, unless you're black, Latino, Asian, Muslim, gay, female, Catholic, Native, Jewish, Irish, Italian, Polish, and not a landowner. Proposition, opposition, members of the House, esteemed guests, my name is Henry Reardon, and I will be advancing the case of the proposition bench on the motion that this House regrets the American Revolution. First, I'll be providing some refutation and response to what we have seen from the opposition bench so far, and then secondly, I'll be advancing into knock-on effects of the American Revolution, and essentially I'll be telling you why those positive things would have happened anyway. And then finally, I will be discussing 2 main points detailing the 2 key elements of the American identity post-revolution that were unique to America: slavery and manifest destiny. So, firstly, let's offer some response to what we...
point.
No, on what point? So, I'll come to you in a minute. Firstly, offering some response to what we heard so far. So the ideas that the previous speaker talked about how the US were some staunch moral warriors to mercantilism's evil, namely slavery. Then explain to me why slavery persisted in this so-called idyllic state 150 years after the UK and the rest of those colonial establishments had gotten had done away with it. This debate isn't about whether those colonial and empire powers started slavery. We're all well aware of that. We're all well aware of that evil. This debate is about the American Revolution, that time period and after, where when it comes to basic human rights, the UK have a much better track record than the likes of America when it comes to the state of America. Then, advancing into some discussion on knock-on effects. I think there's the main thing to talk about here, the big one, the elephant in the room. What was the most major external event in human history that tends to be associated, mechanistically speaking, with America's revolution? The French Revolution. So I'll discuss here, concretely, why La Revolution would have happened independent of the American Revolution and acts as a more effective signpost for revolution and all the ideals you talk about. So, many like to say that the French Revolution would not have happened without the spur of their American cousins. I contend that this is history's finest fiction. 2 reasons: A, pomp, B, circumstance. So, let's talk about pomp. So many like to attest that the French Revolution was brought about by this jolt of rebellious energy sweeping across the Atlantic. The jolt was already there. The writings of leading French philosophers, Jean-Paul Marat and Jean-Jacques Rousseau, are examples of anti-monarchy writing that were both popular and influential. Their writings' popularity predates and exists entirely independently of any external influence. Millions read and heeded the word of those intellectuals. They carried their ideas based on what was happening in their own country, not based on what was happening in the American Revolution. So, for example, Rousseau writes of French oppression dating back to the 1600s, which is external to what we saw in 1776, 1777 in the American Revolution. No, thank you. So, but quite literally, their writings had a major grasp on what we saw in France at that time. So to move on to circumstance. So the opposition would like to tell you that the courage of revolution would never have been stoked in places like France. But trust, they had the incentive. When you're an oppressed pleb watching the life drain from your malnourished child eyes at the hands of a regime more interested in focusing their efforts into Marie Antoinette's Instagram account, you account for 80% of the population, you're angry and heartbroken enough and vengeful enough to back a revolution. So it's safe to say that all the revolutions throughout history and that we see a greater restoration of rights that you talk about, there was a good enough incentive anyway for those revolutions to exist. I'll take a point.
We're not arguing that the American Revolution solely caused the French Revolution.
Okay, that's great. But what I will say is you do argue that, for instance, the ideals and the principles proposed by the American Revolution are fresh. They're groundbreaking. They're what has convinced other parts of the world, like France, for example, to take up arms and to start that revolutionary idea to assert those rights. What I'm saying is that people were onto this anyway. So, let's talk about slavery and let's talk about manifest destiny.
On that point.
I'll be answering 3 questions, come to in a minute. A, what are they? B, why were they exclusive to America? And C, what do they look like? So, slavery in the United States was the legal institution of, and I quote, human cattle enslavement, primarily of Africans and African Americans, that existed in the United States of America in the 18th and 19th centuries, after it gained independence from the British and before the end of the American Civil War. That is the dehumanization, the moral decay of over 30 million human beings who are nothing more than property of another. An economic system so unsophisticated it depended on the eradication of human beings. But that's well established. No one's disputing that. What's important to say is that the states clung on to slavery when the UK didn't, the counterfactual didn't, for 150 years. And while the UK's colonial track record elsewhere was pretty bad, we see, for example, the fact that black soldiers defected to the royalist side in the American Revolution because they knew and were guaranteed more equal rights. And finally, on manifest destiny, the all-American doctrine championed by your so-called glorious founding fathers, an idea not to be reductionist that hinges on, well, that land isn't ours, let's make it ours. Manifest destiny also involved genocide, more slavery, murder, usurpment, and all those evils, and a historical doctrine that acted as a springboard for USA foreign policy and colonialism to this day. That wouldn't have happened because of the international dynamics kind of discussed in the last speech, that the major powers of the UK, Spain and France all had agreements to call this territory fairly no man's land because none had the resources to pursue it, but the post-revolutionary American society saw it as theirs. All men created equal, but some more equal than others. Thank you.
Thank you, Henry, and can I welcome, we go to the next slide, please. Welcome Justin Sankowski to concede the case for the opposition.
Thank you all. I'd like to thank the speakers of the proposition for delivering their speeches very well and in English. I'm sure the House will see the irony in this, is that if the proposition was right and we should regret the revolution in America, they'd all be speaking German, and so all would we. First of all, I'd also like to address a couple of points. For example, when the first speakers talked about none of the expansion westward into the frontier and said it was to preserve the lands of the Native Americans there, he failed to mention that it was also in Britain's commercial interest to continue the fur trade begun by the French before them with the Comanches and the other native tribes in there. So I'd like to put a little commercial point on that. Secondly, we've been talking esoterically about philosophy and all the ideals of the revolution, but should the USA have not succeeded in having a revolution, none of this would have happened. For example, the US in the 20th century has spearheaded efforts for self-determination in the Suez Crisis, in Algeria, in South Korea, in Taiwan. Go on.
So did Panama have full self-determination? Why was the US linked to 81 coups and abrupt overthrows of government in like the last 70 years of the 20th century? If the US clearly, as you stated, stands for the self-determination of peoples, why, when the peoples determine who they want, does the US come in and change that?
Of course, actually it's good because I was coming to that point. The US in the 20th century has sure intervened in other countries' affairs, especially in its own backyard, according to Monroe Doctrine. However, it has done so in order to stop the scourge of communism that was rampant in Panama, in Nicaragua, in Africa. And as you well know, communism is the enemy of freedom.
On that point.
Go on. Oh, I'm sorry.
Do you think that they fought for freedom whenever they supported Pinochet's overthrow of the democratically elected government in Chile, leading to massive human rights abuses? Is that what they call freedom?
Well, what I would say is that I would urge you to look at the track record of socialist and communist states, especially in China and Russia. Unfortunately, we had to make some tough choices. But despite the unfortunate Pinochet regime, I can't imagine what would have spawned if it wasn't him would have been any better.
On that point?
No. No. Second, I'd like to thank America for being responsible for the creation of the most effective deterrent known to man, known as the atomic bomb. That means that it has prevented thousands, hundreds of thousands, potentially millions of people from dying.
On that point?
No. And finally, despite its flaws in the early days of the Union, it also provided some of the greatest opportunities for immigrants, especially Irish, in the face of British oppression.
On that point!
Go on.
So you're saying that the historic discrimination of Irish Americans throughout up until the 1910s is justifiable?
I didn't say justified. I said it provided opportunities for immigration. Also, I'd like to qualify that point. A lot of Irish came after the potato blight in the mid-1800s, which was potentially caused also by the British Crown. So, I'd like to say they probably immigrated and had food in the US and didn't have it back here because of the British and the oppressive rule they had. So, take it as you will. It wasn't great, but it was better than here. Finally, I'd like to tell the House that America, and the reason we're all standing here and safe, is because the US is the sole world's policeman. It has been able...
On that point?
No! It is single-handedly safeguarding all international trade routes and also has led to the decrease in piracy in very many friction points such as the Gulf of Aden, the Horn of Somalia, the Strait of Malacca.
On that point,
1 second, let me finish this. And then finally, most recently, has prevented the creation of a nuclear terrorist state in Iran, thanks to the Stuxnet initiative and our intelligence services. I could not imagine what would have happened if Iran had access to a nuclear bomb. And that's going, POI, whichever one of them, go on. Sorry, close this.
The UN anti-piracy task force consisting of the French, the Swedish, the Danish, and the US and UK navies, and also the UN agreement signed by every single country in the world. Does that sound like a US-only initiative?
I'd like to point back to certain UN initiatives, especially if we look at the Korean War. It was a UN initiative. 80% of the soldiers were Americans. Why did they get pushed back to the 30th parallel? It's us. It's all us. And the piracy things.
On that point?
No. 1 second. I can't speak. So, yes, of course, it's a bilateral, a multilateral agreement. The same way that NATO has the armies of the French and the Swedes and the UK. But who really is behind NATO? It's us. It's the power of the American military that is safeguarding the Europe and many other countries around the world. If you look only at Bosnia and the Ukraine, who's been giving in the most money? Who's been given the most weapons? It's not the UK, it's not the Swedes, it's us. And we're single-handedly helping the Ukrainians keep afloat in this war against the oppressive Russia. That's all I got. Oh, just final point, since you spoke about there being no relation between the American Revolution and the French. I'm French, I know a little bit about this. I would say, if only minimal, extensive French financial and naval support to the US during the War of Independence eventually led to the coffers being empty in France, apologies, and eventually did lead to famine and the material causes that went to the French Revolution. So, if only partially, there is a clear link, if only material, between those two. Unless there's another POI.
Can we get another round of applause for a maiden speaker? And welcome Adam Wilson to continue the case for the project.
Okay, Mr. President, members of the proposition, members of the opposition, and members of the House, I'm here to make my maiden speech as well before the House tonight. As a historian, I would be wrong to not acknowledge the fact that the American Revolution gave way to our modern democratic principles and institutions that we value today. But despite its importance, which has and will no doubtably be acknowledged by the members of the opposition, I would like to argue at what cost. Members of the House, I would like to first note the Revolutionary War's human cost. In the 8 years the war took place, there were approximately 25,000 American casualties and 24,000 British casualties. This may not seem like many, and it was far less than other US conflicts, but let me remind you that the population of the 13 colonies was only 2.5 million, and historians have noted that it's equivalent to about 3.5 million people when compared to today's US population. That's about 1% of the population. This has a major impact on the US economy as well as society, as there were fewer adult males to work on farms in a nation where agriculture was the most important industry to their developing country. And you might be able to see where I'm going with this, but the shortage of workers in the US after the war, particularly in the southern colonies, where agriculture was crucial to the economy, meant that slavery was inevitably prolonged. This dependency on slaves, as we know, is also a direct cause of the American Civil War, which arose due to disputes over slavery and other rights of states, specifically the expansion of slavery into Western territories that were newly acquired by the Louisiana Purchase and other annexes and purchases between 1776 and 1861. So as we know, the heavy use of slavery allowed for the American economy to flourish, and today's US dollar even serves as a dark reminder of the US's dark economic history. According to...
On that real quick. Is it all right if I ask a quick question about how much did slavery, human capital, contribute to the capital of the GDP of the American?
That I'm not sure of,
okay.
But I just know it was a significant amount.
Okay.
The U.S. government itself, specifically the Bureau of Engraving and Printing, which is obviously involved with the money, notes that the paper that's used to make the U.S. dollar is made out of 25% linen and 75% cotton. That's a bit ironic, isn't it? It seems there is a lot of blood stained on U.S. currency. The early American economy was founded through the use of slaves picking cotton for the most part, and now today we can see where that cotton has ended up, so to speak. No one seems to recognize the illusion of freedom that is portrayed by the US. In a new nation that's built on the foundations of modern democracy and acts as the hero and peacekeeper in the world even today, as the opposition had said about the US being the global policing force, is that not more sort of reminiscent of a new empire? And there's theories of Pax Americana being, America being powerful and this whole illusion. Anyway, yes?
May I just ask, between the years of 1991 and 2001, were those years not the most prosperous and the most safe for every country in the world comparatively to now? And is that why potentially we call it Pax Americana, because the US was a single world leader?
10 seconds.
Some would argue differently. There are political theories that suggest that the period of the Cold War was the most stable because nobody wanted to blow up at each other because of the whole nuclear weapon thing, and each conflict was solved by proxy wars. But good point anyway. Yes, where was I here? Yes, they failed to recognize that they were and are just as much of a controlling and oppressive empire as the empire that they were fighting against. Let's note that the abolition of slavery was not noted in the original Constitution, but instead the 13th Amendment, which was added in 1865. And some might even argue even later than this because of the whole civil rights movement, and it officially, black people officially didn't have real power in the country until 1968. Whilst the British Empire abolished slavery in their colonies in 1833, so even before that. Although they're not, that's not all that far, apart from each other. It's a different perspective of because both, one's an empire, one is perceivably not an empire. So to move this forward, the methods by which I'm going to start talking about indigenous peoples here, by the way. The methods by which westward expansion after the US acquisitions were carried out existed after the US won the Revolutionary War. President Andrew Jackson felt that he needed to take over this newly acquired land, which I would like to remind everyone is inhabited by hundreds of indigenous tribes. To do this, Jackson and the US Congress passed the 1830 Indian Removal Act, which led way to the infamous Trail of Tears campaign. Between 1830 and 1850, the US government forcibly displaced 60,000 and murdered between 13,000 and 16,000 members of the Cherokee, Muskogee, Seminole, Chickasaw, and Choctaw nations. Forgive me if I butchered that. Just for perspective, that's about that's about how many people fit in the SSE arena. And placed them in a designated Indian territory, which I believe was around Oklahoma. But just imagine if that was you, forcibly removed when you least expect it, brought to a new place, and being monitored by a power that you don't really want to be monitored by. It'd be a shame as a Canadian not to mention the Great White North in this speech. In contrast to the Indian Removal Act, the Canadians passed the Indian Act in 1876, which covered the governance, land use, healthcare, and education of the Indigenous people within Canada. The Indian Act not only acknowledged the Indigenous people of Canada as citizens of the colony, but aimed to promise them several basic rights that were promised by King George III in the Royal Proclamation of 1763, which was a formal declaration, passed through after they acquired after they won the 7 Years' War. So essentially, the official proclamation designated any territory west of the Appalachian Mountains as Indian Reserve and no colonizer could settle there. Unfortunately, that was not always the case, but yes, and finally I want to acknowledge the similarities between the US and Canada. So Canada is, 10th most wealthiest nation in the world, obviously the US being the top, but the point of this is that both nations got there at very different stages, one being a revolution, one being constitutional monarchy, but they are equally, and arguably Canada is more democratic than the United States, but they are equally as powerful and influential in today's world as today. So I would argue is the American Revolutionary War pointless. Thank you.
Another round of applause for a maiden speaker. Thank you, Adam, and can I welcome Colton Tossig to continue the
You'll just wait one moment while I get my timer ready, if that's okay.
I would talk to the iPad on that.
What about this? This. I think we're gonna be okay, folks.
American technology. American innovation.
Poor Rip. And then apologize for the delay. Is everybody ready? Alrighty then, let's begin. If you want something you never had, you must be willing to do something you have never done. Thomas Jefferson. When we look over the question whether this House regrets the American Revolution, the House must first examine the benefits of which have gone largely unnoticed by the proposition, and come to recognize that the American Revolution is more sophisticated than a group of angry farmers revolting against the price of tea. By examining the movements of the first abolition, the beginning of separation of church and state, as well as the metamorphosis of subjects to citizens, one will understand why this revolution was not just necessary, but in the context of history, important and decisive for the outcome of increased liberty and freedom among peoples. After understanding the weight of the revolution, I will address that there was no better alternative due to insufficient British designs and relentless authoritarian overreach. I will conclude by responding to my opponent's arguments and then address the global repercussions, of which many are positive, due to the American Revolution. Before I do so, I'm going to briefly go over some of what my opponents have listed. I will be back. I'm going to do what you did. Really quickly. So specifically within talking about the French Revolution, how we gave, basically there's no correlation, and he gives a lot of pathos about pomp and circumstance. Specifically in pomp, he lists a lot of the founding texts that pre-existed America. In fact, we actually drew on those texts to create our government. And then second, within circumstance, he gave a very, very well-worded speech about how tragic the French state was in. But just because people are dying does not necessarily mean that there's revolution. The Irish famine is a great example of which famine happened, tragedy happened, and there was no revolution.
On that point,
yes.
Actually, there was
I'm so sorry, would you mind? I can't hear you.
There were a numerous number of Irish revolutions, specifically as a direct result of the Young Irelanders rebellion. So there was rebellions as regards the famine.
Okay, there were. I did not acknowledge that there were rebellions, by no means, but an overthrow of the government. Sorry, excuse me. Let me move onward. So specifically, moving from that, what I'm going to be talking about specifically is within reformations of the benefits. There's a lot of talk about slavery and indigenous people. And this is very important because it's something that most major world powers have to contend with in their history. When we look within the slavery argument, a lot of what they're going to be saying is, as Dr. Jeffrey Himmer, economist, states, in regards to slavery, many are made well aware of the Parliamentary Act of 1833 that abolished slavery throughout Britain and its colonies. It was effective in 1834. Although with an explicit exception for territories controlled by the East India Company, the Act's passage had partly been assisted by a major slave revolt in Jamaica during the previous 2 years, along with a tight symbiotic relationship between American and British abolitionists. The oft-repeated argument is that without American independence, this act would have simultaneously abolished slavery in what became the United States. But this ignores the fact that the British emancipation had to overcome the stiff political opposition of West Indian planters, and that emancipation, by precipitating a collapse of production in the sugar islands, was costly for the British economy. The only conceivable way Britain could have held on to all its American colonies was through political concessions to colonial elites. If American cotton, tobacco, rice, and sugar planters had still been under British rule, they inevitably would have allied with West Indian sugar planters, creating a far more powerful pro-slavery lobby.
On that point?
Yes.
Okay, so you give great analysis there on how horrible and brutal these slavery practices were all right. However, what the distinction here, what matters is that the UK actually guaranteed to roll back on a lot of slavery policies in order to incentivize essentially black men to enlist in the counter-revolutionary struggle.
Okay, yeah, no, I don't disacknowledge any of those facts. I completely agree, but that's not relevant to the fact that, once again, if you look over Britain's imperial policies, we can go to Canada, we can go to Nova Scotia, we can talk about literally in which their Canadian's Prime Minister in 2008 said that there were many acts in which literally the act was called Kill the Indians Act. Like, we have to recognize that when it comes to the indigenous peoples and African Americans, no one's done a great job. And specifically in regards to that, we can look at the fact that the only conceivable way Britain to hold on to America would have made compromises, and it would have actually strengthened the pro-slavery position within America and within Britain.
On that point?
I apologize, I have a few more things to say, and it might clarify your points. But specifically within the argument that I have about slavery, we have to examine, that the benefits of the first abolition movement and the ending of slavery should not be understated. To put forth in a way, Britain is relying on cotton, sugar, tobacco from the American colonies. It's more essential to the British economy than Caribbean sugar at the time. If America was still under British rule at this period, we could have seen an actually greater and stronger pro-slavery lobby. It would have been actually more difficult to dispel anti-slavery movements at the time, specifically because there would be more economic incentive. Remember, everybody was actually quite anti-slavery during the 1780s and 90s. It wasn't until the invention of the cotton gin in 1801 that there was a huge economic increase and people began to see human labor as an actual good, as a purchasable good, instead of the necessary evil that it was originally viewed as. Yes, I will take this last point of information.
So you were talking about how there was no move towards the abolition of slavery, but the 1775 Dunmore Proclamation was to give freedom to every black man who enlisted, and this was pre the active Revolutionary War. Is that not a movement towards abolitionism?
Just because there's a movement towards abolitionism does not necessitate that the economics, that it would have been economically incentivized for Westminster to do that in the future. You have to realize that just because people are doing good things doesn't mean that government proposition is going to come after it. Specifically, I mean, you look at in 1786, the Confederation Congress also prohibited the extension of slavery into the Northwest Territories. You can look at all the smaller territories as actually going through and bit by bit emancipation in forms. There's a tendency to minimize the first emancipation because slavery had was less economically entrenched in the northern colonies than in the southern colonies, and because in many northern states slavery was eliminated gradually, but emancipation had to start somewhere. Excuse my sloppiness, as this is my first time, but recognize nonetheless that within the resolution, we have to realize that though slavery is a tragedy, that it is much more complicated than to simply say that America as a whole, if America existed, America is completely responsible for all the atrocities of slavery. And we have to recognize once again that it's within this that we do not regret the American Revolution, especially for the ideals it upheld and the fact that though it is a rough shot, don't get me wrong, and the American dream has cost a lot, and it's been hard for everybody, and we've never done it right in the sense that it's been perfect. It is about the ideals that we pursue, and it's about how we have to testify and try for those things, regardless of the cost. It's for those reasons that I advocate for. Thank you.
Matthew to close the case of the proposition.
Yeah, America's not really great, so we're gonna go through that. First of all, America's a pretty policeman. Some people have said the world policeman's off duty. You said that America was leading the help for Ukraine, but it really isn't. It's actually lagging behind. The EU has committed twice as much to Ukraine, and the US support has been lacking, especially recently. The US exit from Afghanistan was detrimental because apparently the US would rather have 13,000 troops home, which, by the way, half as many as they have stationed in Korea, than stop the Taliban from preventing women and girls from reading and writing, which is one of those seems like a bigger, grave humanitarian injustice than the other. America, great track record in Vietnam, great track record in Iraq, good job there. Great job stopping the Rwandan genocide. Loved when you didn't do that. Slavery. That's what I'd like to talk about. America arguably because it didn't, with the Mayflower landing of 1620. No thank you. The slaves arrived in America first in 1619. Slavery in the UK was deemed to be somewhat abolished in 1772 with the famous Somerset ruling, which said that slavery was an unnatural condition. And then, of course, in 1833, year of independence, it lasted longer in British East India-controlled territories, but only 10 years longer. Not as long as it lasted in America. During the American Revolutionary War, the Dunmore Proposition encouraged American slaves to fight for the British side in return for their freedom. And 100,000 slaves took up this offer. If you've seen the hit musical Hamilton, you'll remember the Battle of Yorktown. What that musical doesn't include is the bit just after the Americans win the Battle of Yorktown, when Washington and the other generals go out onto the field and personally retrieve their slaves. We've had Jefferson quotes. 600 is the number of slaves Jefferson owned in his lifetime. 2 is the number he freed. So there's a man who really believes that all men are created equal, and that's a self-evident truth. Ultimately, America had 100 years of slavery before it got round to abolishing it, and it only managed to abolish it through brutal, bloody conflict. Arguably, even with the economic conditions that Colton talked about, the UK would have succeeded in abolishing it because, as you remember, we didn't give the Americans votes in Parliament, so we could have probably pushed things by slightly easier. But even after the freeing of the slaves in America, the slaves weren't really free. 4 million people were freed after the Civil War, and 20% of them went back into situations that were identical to slavery. You had debt peonage and convict leasing, railroad laws. Essentially, laws were created to make it so that if someone was doing something, they could be arrested. And then these laws were selectively enforced only on black people. If you were walking alongside a railroad, you could be arrested. If you were doing things past sunset, you could be arrested solely for being black. Sure.
Are you suggesting that because the UK abolished slavery sooner, that therefore the UK is less racist than America is?
No, but also in a small way, yes, which I will get to later. because ultimately it was America, not the UK, that freed its last slave in 1941 because it was scared about the propaganda effect it would have. America didn't free its last slave until 1941 when they were worried that the Japanese and Germans could rightfully use it as a propaganda tool against the US. Until this point, slavery was, in essence, legally okay in America. We know that in 1865 a law was passed, the Constitution was amended to say that slavery was prohibited. But no laws came in place saying what the punishment for slavery was, and people successfully, in legal courts, battled this out and said, no, they aren't debt peonage, they're slaves, and the courts were like, we're fine with that because we've got no laws in place that say that we're going to punish people owning slaves. This is a country built on slavery. This is a country inexorably wrapped around slavery. This is a country where slavery is the root of the country. If you look at the issues that affect America today, a lot of them can be traced back to slavery. Even after the last slaves were freed, in the 1960s, Nixon comes in, and Nixon basically goes, well, we want to punish anti-war leftists and black people. And so the war on drugs isn't really a war on drugs. It's a war on the anti-left and the black. And this has been attested to by several Nixon advisors who said that essentially by attributing weed to the anti-war left and heroin the black community, they then could attack key members, they could attack key members of each community with impunity. This is the degradation of the rule of law. This is injustice, yes.
So you're saying if the American Revolution did or didn't happen, that racism wouldn't exist magically?
No, I'm not saying it wouldn't exist magically. I'm just saying it's a fact that independent America, I mean, this side talks about how independent America was built on this idea of liberation and freedom, but it was only liberation and freedom for the white upper class. It wasn't liberation and freedom for anybody else. It wasn't liberation for the lower classes, the enslaved people, the coloured people, the Indians, the natives. I mean, it was only the 13 colonies were the bit of the UK that seceded. The US then went on to conquer the whole continent, which is clearly very unjust.
On that note.
Sure, go ahead.
Sorry, to stop the person over there. Are we going to get to the seventh person in the room and not have any critical reflection on who's talking? Obviously, I'm not saying the question as well.
Well, I can't change who I am. I've just been told to debate this side. I can bring you some case studies, some examples, if you would like. John Clark on April 11th, 1905 was convicted of gaming, just, rolling dice on the sidewalk. He was convicted to 114 days of hard labour because he couldn't afford his court fees. He died 34 days into the sentence. Do you think it is just to convict someone to 114 days of hard labour because they were gambling on a sidewalk? I don't think so. This system is more cruel than the slavery of antebellum days, because in the slavery of antebellum days, slave masters at least had to look after their slaves. Under debt peonage and convict leasing, there was no requirement to do so. They just rented people and returned them to the government dead. That's wrong, that's unjust. We should clearly be opposed to this. No thank you, it's past the end of the time. I'd like to just conclude, because I haven't got onto the list of things that Canada does better than the USA, which is a tragedy for all of you. I'd like to conclude with a quote from Lafayette, who has been quoted by this side. Lafayette, of course, famous revolutionary. Lafayette said before his death that if he had known by taking up his sword in favour of the American cause, he would therefore be creating a state of slavery, a state founded on the principle of slavery and the continued existence of slavery, he would have never sided with the American cause. Thank you.
Oh, this is rickety. Give me a second here.
Let's jump right in, shall we? Thank you very much. It's a surprise to be back so soon, but thank you very much. Okay, so it's been an interesting debate tonight, I think we can all admit. I've had a lot of laughter, a lot of different things. Obviously, it's been a bit comedic and a bit controversial. But what I will say is this, is that essentially what this boils down to is the sins of America. America has sins in its past. But as the opposition has pointed out so gracefully, at times, not only does all nations, all states have committed far worse atrocities, and also atrocities in their own, but America at least has an ideal, and the judgment that America is being ideal, the judgment against America is based on the ideals that they go for. Based on the ideals of the American Revolution set forward, that the American state created. We are judging them based on those ideals, and that is good. We should, because those are good. Just let me finish the point for a second. Just let me finish the point for a second. You're like a bunch of chippity rabbits. Right, those ideals, let's be clear, those ideals. No other state has tried to put those ideals. I dare you, let's go with some of America's greatest adversaries. Let's take Soviet Russia. Do you want to take their ideals and judge Soviet Russia against them? I don't think you do. Because while, yes, they pointed out some of the atrocities, and they pointed out that an arena of SSE, that the SSE arena, the SSE arena's worth, if it was filled, would have been killed in tons of Native Indians. I'd like to point out that some of their adversaries. No, I'm not wearing a fucking MAGA hat. Yes, find me a bottle of port. Yes, screw it. I do not care. I do not care. But, give me a second here. At the same time, at different times throughout history, 16,000 people, great, okay. Let's look at Nazi Germany and millions being killed. Let's look at the Ukraine and Russia before World War II and the millions that were being displaced and killed there. Let's look at the ideals of the Khmer Rouge. Let's look at the ideals of all these different countries. Oh, look at all these different international orders that could have been established, and look at how much worse they would have been for the world. The American international order is not perfect. America is by no means not perfect. It is not perfect, but it at least is trying to strive towards a better and the long-term thing. Gee, I'm going to regret this. Do I accept these? I'll accept him.
Okay. So your whole argument hinges on the idea that America is the only one with these ideals, but they're copying mostly Rousseau, which was then also used for the French Revolution.
Yes, but let us discuss the French Revolution in that case. The French Revolution, as they brought up how these writings were in existence. But a good quote from historians looking at the time is that the peasant rarely looked up from the plough. The literacy rates were not of those that could have understood that. And let us be clear that the French Revolution deteriorated into blood, deteriorated into the Napoleonic regime, and then basically a resurgence of the Ancien regime. That was different, but maintained slavery at the same time, brought slavery back, and also stepped itself in blood and in war. No. They talked about, by the way, I just want to tackle this thing about Ukraine funding that was brought up, okay? The EU does contribute more, slightly, but in total aid, okay, 84 billion euros roughly, and the Americans are 68 billion euros, nearly 69 billion euros. Wait a second. The key thing to remember here is that the EU is all of the EU countries put together, and it's all of their aid, including the aid for domestic stuff to rebuild Ukraine after this war. Most of the American aid is being put into that military effort, and it is 3 times more than the third contributor, Germany, 22 million. And the Americans, along with the UK, are probably the only ones training the Ukrainians to actually make them an effective fighting force.
On that point!
There are other countries doing the training, yes, but they're the largest contributors and also probably the most professional. Just saying here, guys. And let's be clear that if the Americans pulled out their support for Ukraine now, Ukraine's war effort that is already suffering, would not be able to continue. They would not, quite frankly, have the logistical capability to continue the war effort as it currently stands. We're talking about history here. We're talking about what's developed, okay? And really, we're judging against ideals. And yes, these ideals have existed wherever, but America put them into a state to progress this forward. And it is an actual actor, not just a theorist. No, let's calm down here. Let's calm down. Let's take this a step back. Let's talk about the post-war era, the era that we've talked about in terms of the most peaceful time, the Cold War, and then the Pax Americana. Again, it was brought up by our side that the winning of World War II, it could have been done by Russia, but it would have been a much bloodier affair for the whole of Europe. You would have a lot more of Europe controlled by Russia, and you can ask the Eastern European states. Most of them have had experience of what happened in the aftermath of that. It was not particularly pleasant. You can argue America wasn't particularly good, but I'd point out that there are many goods that America also did try to do. The Marshall Plan is actually quite a selfless act from America. The funding that the Marshall Plan provided, without much asking in return, and actually allowed most of Western Europe to rebuild itself and become the Europe that we now know today.
On that point?
No. Jesus. It's chaos out here. Fix bayonets because, oh boy, we're in a bloody fight. And a bloody fight that America's been in and the rest of the world's been in. But, of that fight, it isn't that they keep on looking for perfection. You're not going to find perfection. And that's really our argument. You're not going to find perfection anywhere. But you can at least find, no, we're in protected time. Ears, my friend, ears. We're in protected time. But also, it isn't that you're going to have an ideal. If you look at the other big international actors that you could have, I invite the House to think of them and Think about what a Russian world order would be, what a China world order would be, what any of these world orders would be, and that we have the American world order because of the progressions that have happened since the American Revolution. The American Revolution is a good thing, not because it's perfect, but because it's the best thing out of a very sorry bunch of this screwed up world that we live in. Thank you very much. Hi, please put your next.
Quiet, please. Well, that was certainly a debate. Very enjoyable, but thank you to all speakers, especially our 3 maiden speakers. I think it's near unheard of having 3 maiden speakers on a single debate. So can we just have one more round of applause? We'll now turn to questions. We'll do a proposition question first, an opposition question, and an abstention question. On any question, both sides have the right to respond, and an abstention question must be put to both sides fairly and equally. So firstly, do we have a question for the proposition? God.
No, you couldn't.
Could someone please do a question?
Does anyone else have?
Yes. Just two answers here, Mr. President. I didn't know what I'm going to say.
Can you stand just under the camera, please?
Why do you hate never-ending wars? Why do you hate global prosperity? Why do you hate these things that bring the human race forward? It is the military expansion of the world that allows the human race to be driven forward only by a means of war. The greatest trade there is, can the human race be allowed to prosper?
Quiet, please. Proposition.
Similar enough to you, I don't really know what's going to come out here, but I'd say the most valid thing you said is like global prosperity. That's the most kind of valid American narrative, that they brought this amazing economic system where any man can assimilate. I think that's the most like reasonable thing I can extract from that statement, with as much respect as possible.
So no one else does.
What I'd say is that essentially building the American Revolution also was something that built that economic system that we have taken to be good quite axiomatically, and they killed people for thinking otherwise right up until about the 1950s. So maybe what we would challenge is an economic system based not on control of other people, but rather to one based on their need, and an opportunity-based one, rather than where your freedoms are confiscated by the fact that other people can control your property. So that's some sort of response.
Opposition to respond?
I mean, it's a nice ideal, isn't it? But and again, this goes back to the core fundamental of this debate, which is you're looking for perfection, you're not going to find it. But at least the American system tries to develop that. Each to their need. By the way, let's go with the states that have gone over this. We sort of touched on them. The key one, I'd say, big superpower that has been known as the Soviet Union, that sort of went to its knee. Now we're all going to say there was a proper communism, but sure, you can try that. But let's just be clear that the other economic systems that are trying to go in have been far bloodier. Let's just be honest. And unfortunately, was based on and been far more unfair in the long run for those people. I suppose I've tried to give them an answer here to the question that was quite frankly mental, but I mean, there was a mental thing on the opposite side saying slavery was unique to America, which it wasn't you, it was I mean, I'm mental. Sorry.
No right reply.
Do we have a question for the opposition? Hannah.
Right. So, two speakers on the opposition bench put forward a point that was quite frankly mental. And once again, it's one of those times where I wish I could hand back my HLM. So, it's okay to do loads of human rights abuses, anti-democratic practices, torture, murder, destabilisation of democratically elected states, as long as you do it with an ID. So my question is it alright if I drag out Max, waterboard him out the front for simply because I have ID? I mean, like, that seems to be the point put forward. And I don't understand how you can do mental gymnastics to get to the point where that is in any way an acceptable thing to ever say, ever. So just kind of square that circle.
Yeah, actually, it was a miscommunication on my part, to say the least. But no, we would never believe those things to be okay. If there was a group of people that had the same morals that you say yourself possess, then that would be really good for the government. Don't get me wrong. I hate to say it, unfortunately, the way a lot of governments work is in money and in blood. And even though it was a miscommunication on our part that you got that idea, and I'm glad we can clear it up now, we would definitely want to say that we don't believe those things are okay. We don't believe those things are right, even in pursuit of ideals. The ends don't always justify the means. We know that. But what we can say is, as those things have happened, even though they're completely wrong, we have to reckon with that history. Not in the sense that it shouldn't stop us looking forward, in the sense that because of this, we can no longer do any good, but rather because of this, we can have redemption and make it a better place for everyone. Yeah.
Proposition to respond.
Yeah, no, honestly, I 100% agree with your point, and I'd like to bring us back to quite a lot of what I said at the start of the speech. Can you remember when this debate started? Hopes and dreams are But basically, what I said, because this was a question that was brought up by Noah, that the fact of the matter is, the opposition's argument is that we can't regret the American Revolution because other people have done worse stuff and bad stuff, and we can't allow ourselves to think critically about events that have happened in the past. It is perfectly fine for us to look at an event that happened historically and go, these were events that we regret happened, that regretted the course of action that were taken, and the fact that they happened. That is something that is fine to do, and the fact that the opposition is rejecting that notion is deeply concerning to me. And the fact of the matter is that we have to recognize the fact that the revolutionary cause is not something to be idolized 100%. And it wasn't even like the state. Though you talked about how there was no other state that idealized these values. There was the United Republic of the Seven Provinces of the Netherlands that was formed in the late 17th century with the exact same beliefs by the peasantry against the Spanish monarchy, and yet it adhered to those beliefs, not 100% to left, bearing in mind, the Dutch did some bad stuff, but they adhered to those beliefs much a lot better, and in most respects, I don't want to do that, but it's wrong to say that America is alone responsible for everything. Every invention America made could have been invented by someone else. In fact, it was invented by European mathematicians, not American. It could have equally had the same core beliefs were utilized in states both before it even happened and after the fact, arguably better. We must, as this House, be allowed to critically reflect on the event that happened and be unafraid to regret it. And I'd like to finish by bringing us back to the first two cases for the proposition that I outlined, which were never addressed. That we can regret the fact that it has stopped America from reaching its moral reckoning about the ideas the state was founded on, which I believe was highlighted very clearly by the opposition's refusal to reflect critically on events, and the fact that it was, in some respects, a war to preserve tyranny, given the fact that slavery was on its way out and the conjuncture was invented 60 years later, and the abolition movement in the UK was on the rise. The fact of the matter is that abolition probably would have happened well before the cotton gin was invented. And the fact is, by that metric, both cases for the proposition have held up this entire debate, and thus the House should support it out of objective understanding of that.
Thank you. And do we have a question, an abstention question, which must be put fairly to both sides? Kara.
Thank God. Right, okay, so basically, I think this is the second time this term I've argued that people haven't done the motion, and I'm going to do it again. So the problem is, people think this House regrets motions are, this thing is bad. No, that's not this House regrets motions. This House regrets motions are actually far more complicated than that, which is why I enjoy them when they're actually done. This House regrets motions means that the proposition has to argue an alternative reality where the event did not take place, and to argue why it is better than the status quo of what actually happened, right? To do this, you have to establish, say, the American Revolution, if that didn't happen, then this event wouldn't have happened, then this event would have happened, then this event would have happened, which would have led to some catastrophic thing happening. That's what you need to do. And you can't just make blanket statements going like, oh, the American Revolution happened, so this meant this massive event, like hundreds of years down the line, wouldn't have happened. No, you need to put in the legwork to establish why that wouldn't have happened. Now, this side has to argue why the status quo is better than an alternative reality that, to be fair, you did not propose, right? So that your job was harder. However, when that happens, you make up the alternative reality. You do their job for them, and you go, right, so realistically, if this hadn't have happened, it would have led to this, it would have led to this, and the status quo is better because this happened and this happened, it would have led to less deaths, more human rights, all that jazz, right? So please, for one question, do the motion. So you create an alternative reality that would have been better. You defend the status quo. Thank God. Right.
We'll have the proposition first. Quiet, please.
It's a fairly BP state way of understanding.
No, it's not.
But,
it's really not.
Quiet.
In answer to your question, what's the closest equivalent we have to the USA had it not been gained its independence? Canada. Canada has lower infant mortality, lower maternal mortality, higher life expectancy by over 3 years, lower health expenditure despite the better health outcomes. It had suffrage in 1922 versus 1965 for America. It has a lower proportion of the population below the poverty line. It has more equal income distribution. It's got a better electoral system. It's got better air quality. It's got better life satisfaction. Better education system, ice hockey. It's got five times less gun deaths, which, you know, that's probably quite a good thing. It's got a better HDI score. It's got a better score on the Corruption Perception Index. This is the alternative to the American Revolution, and in all the metrics, it wins.
Opposition to respond?
Yeah, well, in terms of your rights, it is like a counterfactual motion, so we're proposing what would have, like, if the American Revolution, if we regret the American Revolution and it never happens, what would be the alternative? Colton kind of alluded to it, or if on the question of slavery, where if the colonies, 13 colonies had remained with Britain, then the southern American colonies and the West Indies would have been able to combine into a more powerful anti-slavery lobby, and therefore slavery might have continued on even longer.
We're going to wrap the questions up there, and we're going to move to the vote on speakerability. This is a vote based on which side you believe spoke the best and gave the most convincing arguments. If you'd like to vote for the proposition, please raise your hand now. James, 18. If you'd like to vote for the opposition, please raise your hand now. And if If you'd like to abstain on the motion, please raise your hand now. Quiet, please. Can we get the vote on speaker ability?
Shut up. Here, shut up. On the question, there were 19 votes for the proposition, 12 votes for the opposition, and 10 people who were actually listening. So, therefore, the proposition has it by, I don't know, the establishment manager.
Shut the fuck up. Shut the fuck up. Rocco Lavrix after debating for pints, non-alcoholic drinks and other drinks. You're all very welcome to join us. We should have a space book provided but we went through, not entirely sure it has. It is not in the woodworkers, it's in the upstairs pool bar bit. So whenever you all see me walking down and I walk into the main bar of Lavrix, there's not like you walk into the side bar of Lavrix. Follow me. We are going to. So yeah.
And then just before we all leave.
Actually, one last thing, just to address something that you definitely brought up, which is incredibly important. Apologies. As you've probably noticed, if you've been here recently, I've been speaking at every debate. You bring up an excellent point that we need more speakers. So if you thought this debate was fun, if you thought that you want to get involved, if you want to make sure that there is a more representative debate, please talk to Misha. The debate's available.